What's up, guys? Today I'm going to talk about my process of going from being a beginner to earning the medal and the title of an Ironman this last summer. I did Ironman Coeur d'Alene, which is a triathlon that is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and a 26.2 mile run or a marathon. So it's kind of the longest distance of triathlon out there. There's other distances, and I had wanted to do it for a long time, and so I didn't plan on making this video, but since finishing that, I've talked to a lot of people who have mentioned that they also have had a goal like this in mind, but have just been, nervous and didn't quite know what it took to prepare. And so I'm gonna try to give a little bit of insight of my process, what I learned through it, and just how I approached it being a normal, person working a full-time job and having a life around it. So I'm gonna run through the training, the nutrition, the gear I use, the race day, how that went, as well as the big lessons I learned, and then what I'm up to now, which is not doing triathlons, and I'll share a little bit about that, but why I'm still highly recommending that if somebody who's interested, try it. So first off, just for a little bit of perspective on my fitness background, I wanted to share about how I was very average and not an athlete really prior to this. So I grew up on a farm in Washington. The majority of my fitness probably honestly came from working on the farm, hauling hay, running cattle, all that stuff. And I also played baseball for a handful of years, little league, middle school, and then into high school. But then I stopped primarily because of work. And then I also did one season of cross country in high school, which you'd think was probably a good preparation for this. In some ways it was, but I was a very mediocre runner. Honestly, the coaches who were about to retire could keep up with or pass me. And so anyways, that was the extent of my organized sports career. And then after high school, I had been running relatively consistently, but I went down the path of trying to become a fireman, and that tends to involve a lot of physical training. And so I would be hiking a lot. I love to backpack, and so I would hike for backpacking and for training. I would run casually. I've never been fast, and I'd never done much more than 5 and 10Ks. That was kind of a distance I was comfortable with, but not much beyond that. And then I also had swam a little bit, but very casually, much like most people, where it's like, jumping off a boat or swimming across a river or something like that, but never of any distance. And so fast forward to a couple years later, a friend of mine at work was talking to me about how he had wanted to do a triathlon and that he was thinking about signing up for one, and told me I should join. And so I did. And that was an Olympic distance, which is a lot shorter distance than an Ironman, but we prepared for a whole 2 months. At that point, I got into the pool, swam across for my first time, and was just panting and out of breath, and was like, oh boy, this is gonna be a problem. And I was so uncomfortable. And I had no idea how somebody could do multiple laps, let alone 800 meters or a mile or even beyond. And so I did a bunch of research, talked to people, and learned just how to get comfortable in the water, which was pretty much just changing your brain from thinking that it always needs air when it's face down because we're not fish, and it kicks you into this fight or flight response, to just realizing I'm good, I don't need air, mixing in the water, and then just slowly working up the pace. So that helped me. I biked a little bit, I ran a little bit. We did the event at a very casual pace, and we were able to complete it. And it was awesome. I enjoyed it. And it was a good confidence booster. And then we talked about how doing an Ironman would be super rad someday, but I knew the capacity was so much further away from where I was at the time that it would take a long time to prepare. And so that leads me into the last 5 years. And so from there, I started running a little bit more distance. Again, I've never been fast, but over the next following few years, I worked up to marathon distance. I ended up doing a couple of marathons and an ultra marathon, or it was actually a 50K, so barely an ultra, but did those. All of them were slow, but I got them done. I built up the capacity to where I was comfortable doing an entire marathon distance, albeit slow. And then I kind of moved on to biking, and I had been mountain biking casually in the past, but not much seriously. And cycling can be something that's really challenging to jump into, and your legs just tend to get beat up even if you are relatively fit. And so I started doing it casually with friends here, and then here just a few years ago, I started doing a couple of races here and there, mountain bike races of relatively short distances. And then I slowly got more and more comfortable until summer of 2022, when I did a fairly big mountain bike race and some training days, and got to the point where I was comfortable spending a long day in the saddle on the bike, and I felt like I had the capacity there. And so while I hadn't swam since the prior triathlon, the Olympic distance one, I felt like I had kind of culminated the other two big events. And so then I decided to sign up for the Ironman. I had about a year to prepare, and I really needed to work on the swimming. So that was kind of the path up until the summer of 2022, which put me about 10, 12 months out from the event. And that's when I jumped into seriously figuring out how I would put them together and then start doing a lot more swimming so that I could get comfortable, because at that point I'd only swam half a mile one time during that prior triathlon, and that was a stretch for me. So I signed up for the race, and Ironmans are pretty expensive, and so I decided quickly that not only was it a goal that I wanted to succeed in, but also it was not something that I wanted to spend the money on and not succeed like my goal had set out for, because I didn't want to have to repeat it. And so I started by doing a little bit of research into the training side, and this is what I found. So I have a friend who's also a fireman here locally, and he used to be a competitive triathlete and a collegiate runner, has quite a bit of experience. And so I called him because I figured he'd have some good perspective for me, not only from the racing side, but then also from the lifestyle side, knowing the job that I work and that I'm not a pro athlete. And so we talked for a bit, and here's what I boiled down from that conversation along with some other reading. The biggest things, the takeaways that I got, and what I really put as the headliner to all of my training was, one, I needed to focus on building capacity and not on speed. So capacity and speed are kind of two different things, and while they can sometimes be worked on simultaneously, for me, I was so far away from having the capability of doing all the events in one day that I needed to work up to that level before I worked on trying to get each event specifically lower. And the challenge with that is that you have a limited training potential when you start, depending on where you're at, and you can only work up at an increment that is sustainable, that you can actually recover from and continue to train without injuring yourself. So I need to focus on building capacity, and that injury during training specifically was my biggest risk. And so if I did increase the capacity too much, too fast, or the intensity, there was a high risk of an overuse injury or something else. And so I needed to really focus on recovering well and only training to a level that I could recover from. And then for the training, I was going to use heart rate as the primary metric, with time being the thing that controlled how long I trained. So I would set volume per weekly basis, and then I would decide how much time I would spend in which heart rate zone, primarily focusing on zone 2 or my aerobic threshold, which there's all sorts of good information out there about that. And that was what I used. So I started working towards coming up with an idea of what I was going to go with. I didn't hire a coach. I didn't pay for a program or anything like that. I just made a spreadsheet, which I'll actually link to down below in case anybody is curious to see that. And I just plugged in where my starting point was, so my current training level, how much I was doing by volume per week, and then I just moved it all the way out to the race day and only increased it by small increments. For me, it was a half an hour per week increased in total volume. So that's all 3 domains for the entire week, increasing by only 30 minutes. And I think I started somewhere around the 5-6 hour a week mark, and I worked all the way up until I think my peak weeks were around 15 hours a week. But again, that might vary person to person. Then he also said that because the job I work, we work shifts that go through the night, and we can run calls at night, and it can ruin your sleep. If I don't recover well, be it because of work and sleep or something else, then be smart and only train to the level that you think you're going to recover. So don't be a baby. Don't just use it as an excuse. But again, don't get hurt. So don't train beyond your recoverability. So that was the primary advice that I got and what I led to. And at the top of my training plan, I wrote completion is the goal, and an injured athlete can't train or race. And so I had to really focus on that, which can be hard for somebody that is driven or used to training at a more intense level. So overall, this training method worked for me. I used the spreadsheet. I copied and pasted the week, all the way through to the event. increased it by 30 minutes, divvied up the time in each domain at roughly the same ratio that they would be on race day. So like the bike is the longest one in time and in distance, obviously. The run is the second longest, and then the swim is the least amount. And so I had a rough ratio that would match roughly that of the race day. And I'd split those up between, a different number of workouts, and a lot of that was just dictated by my work schedule or by how I was recovering. So some days I'd work out twice, some days I wouldn't at all. But again, I was just trying to slowly, incrementally work up with each domain. So next up, I'm going to talk about the nutrition. So I have, like I said, I've worked for a long time in the fire service, and I've done a lot of hiking, things like that. And so in those types of activities, you tend to need to eat a lot while on the go, and or eat quickly and then go. And that turns out to be actually one of maybe my only or biggest strengths in this whole world, because there's a lot of people that have difficulty with consuming calories, especially during the event, but also even in training, in a way that you can sustain the energy levels you need without having GI issues that just cause all sorts of problems. And so fortunately, eating has never been a weak point of mine, which certainly can be a negative. But I went into this knowing that, one, I would like to lose weight, because generally speaking, with most of these activities, the lighter you are, if you retain the same amount of strength, the faster you move, and you just have less weight to carry. So I would like to lose weight, but I didn't want to restrict calories because the recovery was superseded the desire to lose weight. And so I ate by feel, and I just wanted to make sure that I was, listening to my body, eating as much as I could, trying to eat relatively clean. I pretty much eliminated all alcohol for the whole process. And come race day, I didn't lose a single pound. I was actually at the exact same weight I had started, which, surprises a lot of people, but it is what it is. And that day, I knew it was just a game of calories. A lot of people might approach this thinking that, you need to have the healthiest day ever to perform like your peak potential, but there's a lot of material on this. You should read into it. Ultimately, it becomes a game of calories and electrolytes on race day. And so for me, I crushed a ton of different just super sugary foods, from candy to donuts and gummy bears. And then I had some mixes. And then for electrolytes, all the way through the process, I was using electrolyte drink mixes like these things right here, and energy mixes. And then on days when they were super long and I just didn't feel like I could consume enough, I would also implement something like this, which is like an electrolyte pill. Some people call them like salt pills. That, and then whatever you can stomach. So the food can really be anything. Like I said, I had a donut. I actually had two donuts, one before I started the race, one as I got on the bike. People laughed at me as I did it, but that's what worked for me, and I don't regret it one bit because they pack a lot of calories. Whatever you do for nutrition, just know that the event is going to take, anywhere from 8 to 17 hours. And so you have to do something that's sustainable for you. And if you run out of fuel, if your glycogen stores are depleted early on, you're going to be kind of screwed, and it's really hard to catch back up. So staying up ahead of it, hydrating properly, that's a huge name of the game. And so it's good to bring that back into your training as well. Practice eating the things that you might want to eat on race day, and training with somewhat of a full stomach, and maybe even eating while you are training. Okay, so now for the gear itself. This one is a massive space. It can be a bit overwhelming, and there's a lot of good material out there on this, but I'll just share what I used and some thoughts on it. So first off, I do recommend getting a decent watch, whether it's an Apple Watch. I have a Garmin Fenix 7 or something else. They're really nice to have. They have GPS features, and they can connect to your heart rate monitor. And so I use this to track all of my workouts, from the swimming to the running to the biking. Everything was tracked on here. And then that way you just have metrics that you can then look at the end of the workout, use it for recording. You can see, confirm your heart rate, all that stuff. And I coupled it with a heart rate monitor, so a chest strap heart rate monitor, just because wrist-based heart rate are pretty inaccurate and unreliable. And so it's good to have that, especially if you're training in the way that I was, which was primarily based off of your heart rate. For the swimming, I had a swim cap and a set of goggles. These right here, actually. And you can get both of these for like 20 bucks. And that's all I used. I got a YMCA membership, went to the pool. They have, I think it's a 25-meter pool, and I just do laps there. I didn't use any fancy tools. A lot of people use hand paddles or flippers or foam things for their legs, and I'm sure they're great because obviously there's a reason, you know, the pros use stuff like that, but I didn't use any of that. It worked out fine. I just swam, again, focusing on heart rate, distance, time, and then my form. And there's a lot of good information on that stuff. And then for the biking, I primarily trained on a smart trainer in my shed. So I bought a road bike, a used road bike that was like less than $1,000. It has some clip-on aero bars, which are just used to get more aerodynamic when you're riding. Not required, but most riders use them, and especially, you know, dialed in triathletes, they have bikes specifically made for that. But mine was just a standard road bike, and then I had a smart trainer. Like I said, it was a direct drive Wahoo Kicker, was what it's called. And it had Bluetooth, so it connected to my watch and to my phone. And so I could get all of the data that I wanted right here, live. I could just watch, you know, if I was wanting to do a time-based workout and control my heart rate, I could see them both right here, connect my heart rate monitor and my trainer and just ride. Or if you want to, there's apps that you can use to do virtual workouts or all sorts of different stuff. But for the most part, for my training, I knew how long I needed to go and what heart rate I needed to be in. And so I would just start cranking away. And then I had a phone mount on the front. I'd put my phone on and I'd just watch videos so that I could, you know, get away. But the trainer was really nice to have. They're kind of expensive, but they're really nice to have because it just takes so much less time to, you know, get out and ride when it's just right there. You jump on. There's no risk of cars. You don't have to deal with the weather or anything like that. And so I really liked it. It's not required. You can certainly ride a stationary bike at the gym or obviously on the road. But if you're at the gym, sometimes it can be hard to get the metrics from that workout if you're trying to record them or be able to look back on things like that. And with the bike, I don't think that you have to obviously buy a super nice bike or know everything about it. But I do think there are a few things you should know, and that's like, you know, how to maintain your chain, how to deal with issues if your chain comes off or breaks or something like that, your derailleur and how the gear system works. And then also the most likely thing being a tire problem. So if you're running inner tubes and you blow a tire, how to fix that, replace the tube or patch it or whatever you decide to go with. And you can learn a lot of that stuff at your local bike shop. Like I just went into my shop right over here and asked them some questions, got some insight from them. And so there are resources out there that could potentially help you on race day depending on where you're at. But it's just nice to have a little bit of information on that front. And then lastly, for the running, I opted for a very cushioned style of shoe just because running is the most jarring activity, and a lot of recommendations I read said to basically limit your running to only as much as you need to do, just because if you're going to injure yourself, that's the most likely thing to cause it, again, just because of the jarring nature of it. And so I typically run in ultra, like kind of minimalist style running shoes, or I have for years. But for this, I bought a pair of those cushioned Hokas, and they worked well for me. I didn't have any major issues. I did have some shin splint problems towards the end, but I really don't think that was a result of the shoes specifically. I think that was just, just maybe a little bit of overtraining, but I was able to deal with them. And then I bought a pair of compression sleeves for my calves for race day, and that was, again, just because of those shin splints. That was something I'd read could help. And whether they did or they didn't, I don't know, but I didn't have any issues on race day, and so I count them as a win. And back to the swimming stuff, I forgot to mention that I did buy a wetsuit, and that was because my event was up on Lake Coeur d'Alene, and the water's really cold, and they allow wetsuits if the water's below a certain temperature. And so I got one. It was really nice for a few of the open water swimming trainings that I did prior to race day as well as on race day. Definitely get one that fits you well. You can rent them for race day, and that can definitely be an affordable way to go. But you don't want them to be too small because they can be very restrictive on your arms, and you don't want them to be too big because then they just become a water catch, and they definitely would slow you down, cause a lot of drag in the water. So that's the majority of the gear talk. Now for race day. So for the race day, I did not have a specific target for a time. My goal was to complete it and to be done before 17 hours because that's the cutoff of being considered an Ironman, completing the event. And so I had calculated out roughly what my training times were and where I think I might land if I had a good day. And so I brought that with me, but I wasn't married to it. And I just wanted to focus on completion and making myself, proud of the training that I had put in. So we took off. Starts with the swim. They lined us up with a tiered start. So every 5 seconds, well, after the pro groups took off, every 5 seconds, I think it was, they would release three swimmers. And then you go out into the lake. There's buoys out there, and we go do 2 huge laps. And there's a bunch of kayaks and paddle boards and medical personnel out there kind of watching. And so started the swim. It was pretty good, actually. I decided that I did not want to get kicked in the head because I had in the past, and that's honestly one of the biggest challenges out there a lot of the time is just dealing with other people that you're trying to pass or get passed by. And so I kind of went wide on the course, gave people the inside. That way, if somebody faster was trying to come by, I gave him space, probably add a little bit time, but then I didn't have to worry about getting kicked in the head, so I could do full arm strokes. I wasn't doing like check strokes to kind of guard my head, and it was just seemed less risky to me. So that's what I did. Overall, it went pretty well. My target was roughly 130. I figured if I had a good day, and I actually got out of the water at 119, an hour and 19 minutes. So that was good for me. I was happy with it. And then I stripped out completely at the transition and switched into my bike bib shorts, the padded shorts, and then just a normal jersey. I don't have a tri-suit. I didn't have one just because they're expensive, and I didn't want to buy one for this one event. And I just didn't think that those few seconds saved were going to be the thing that made the difference for my day. So I didn't have that. Got out of the water, went through the transition, chugged some electrolyte mix, shoved a donut in my mouth, grabbed my bike, and took off. As soon as I jumped on my bike to take off with the donut hanging out of my mouth, my chain flew off. And so I had to stop, try to get my chain on, trying to breathe with the donut clogging my mouth. And it was funny, but people were encouraging. And then got going, took off, and it was a fairly long course. It was over 7,000 feet of gain over the 112 miles. And it was tiring, but there was aid stations throughout, and they had the road majority of the time controlled, so there was no traffic on the side that we were on, and you could just cruise. I found that I didn't spend a ton of time in the aero position just because I wasn't comfortable doing that from my training, and I didn't want to push too hard on this because I knew the running was still coming, and so I took what I considered a moderate pace. It took me about 6.5 hours, and then I got off and I felt pretty decent. Throughout that whole thing, I had been eating goos and different snacks that I had already in my jersey, and especially in the last hour before the run because I knew the run was coming, and I tend to be able to consume calories easier while on the bike because it's a more smooth thing than when you start running and you start jostling up and down. So I ate a bunch of food during that. I used some of the aid stations. I replenished my water at some of them. And I just focused on not getting behind on calories per my plan, which from some rough calculations, I knew I needed about 10,000 calories that day. So I had done some calculations, put things aside, and just figured I'd eat as much as I possibly could. And then got to the run. And that's when the pain really came for me. Once I was back on the street, my body just quickly felt like I was just kind of bonking and nauseous, and so getting calories in was hard. My original plan of how I was gonna walk just didn't quite fold out the way that I had hoped. It had been recommended to me that even if you feel good starting the run, come up with an interval of run to walk that you force upon yourself for the first half until you've confirmed that you're feeling good. Otherwise, it's just so easy to go out hot and burn out. And so while the walk periods ended up being a little bit longer than I had anticipated, I made it through the run, tried to hit every single aid station, eat whatever my body was craving, because oftentimes if you start to get, your electrolytes are off, your sodium's low, you'll start to crave things like that. And so you're eating chips, drinking Coke, whatever it is that you can get the calories. And then it felt like a lifetime, but I made it. I made it to the finish line. It took me 13.5 hours, which was good for me. I was happy with it. It's so far off of a pro time, but I don't really care. And I was really happy with it. I felt like I had pushed hard. I didn't feel that terrible at the end. I was still able to walk around. I didn't feel horrible. And so I was really proud of the preparation because, while it had realistically been a 6-7 year process, that last year I had really focused and sacrificed a lot of time to train. And I was really happy with it. I was really proud. And so finished it, got my medal, and then within a few days, I honestly felt pretty normal again, which I was surprised by. I kind of anticipated potentially having some injuries that would linger for a while and knock me out, but that wasn't the case. So here are the big lessons that I learned from that I guess I would pass along, and hopefully they'll help you as you take on whatever distance triathlon it is, but especially an Ironman if that's something that is in your goal list. So first off, and this one's probably obvious, but have realistic expectations about the training. So if you're gonna sign up, it's expensive, it takes a lot of commitment, and you need to realize that from the beginning. Doing like a marathon or a 10K or something like that, like people that are relatively fit can go out and just make it through, suffer through. They might be injured, whatever, they can make it though a lot of times. I heard this early and I agree with it, but it's like in Ironman, you can't do that. You will not make it if you do not train a lot and you're not dedicated to it. And so realize that early, talk to your family, whoever's gonna be around you, make sure that it's realistic for you to have the time and the money for the gear to make it happen, because otherwise it's a huge commitment to potentially waste. And so for me, Sadie was a huge help. It definitely made it possible really, because if she wasn't on board, there's just no way I could have done it. Second, low intensity training. So zone 2, I know that's a heart rate zone that has been being talked about a lot recently, but I 100% believe that low intensity training was the only reason that I was able to make it through the day. And that can be something that's hard for a lot of people, especially younger people who have, different, whatever form of athletic background. The idea of training at a low intensity seems unproductive, but do some reading on it, learn about zone 2 training, the value of the aerobic threshold training, and realize that if you don't have the capacity already, you probably need to spend the majority of your time just building that capacity before you can even think about working on the intensity and the speed side of things. Next, gear is important, but you don't have to get carried away. So on the race day, I mean, there was hundreds of thousands of dollars of bikes lined up. Like, I don't even know, but the average bike was probably $5,000 to $15,000. Mine was obviously not. It was much cheaper. It was used, and that's fine. Like, if you have a bike already, you probably want one that's roadworthy because it is a long course, but you don't need a crazy bike. There was a lot of cyclists riding fancy bikes that I passed or that I saw dropping out. And so while I'm sure they would be helpful, I realized quite quickly that the training is so much higher in value than the bike that you ride. And so until you get to a point where you're trying to be competitive or work on it, I just would not worry about getting the fanciest gear. A watch, a heart rate monitor, things like that are super helpful, focused on the training side and the avoiding injury. But as far as going crazy on the super high-end techie gear to increase or decrease your speed, decrease your time, I just wouldn't bother getting carried away with that. Next, track your training. So the way I did it using the spreadsheet, it worked. I think that's a great way to go. If you're somebody who can be self-motivated and follow some sort of plan like that and be willing to record it and make adaptations as you go. Or hire a coach. There's a lot of great ones out there. But the reality of it is you need to train enough, but you don't want to overtrain. And so there's kind of a fine threshold. And you need to make sure that you're able to find that, whether it's on your own or with help. Next, and I already mentioned this one before, but practice eating and training. So eating, again, is one of the things that most people talk about having a struggle with throughout the event. It's just such a long day and there's so high of a caloric necessity for that day that if you aren't able to eat and be active, then you're gonna have problems. And so start early in your training, whether it's just eating right before you do a training session, eating during, try the foods that you think you might want to have on race day and just see how your body reacts so that when race day does come, you know what you like, what you're capable of, and it doesn't become a big limiting factor that could completely screw up your day. Next, don't go out too hard. So like I said, the swim, I felt pretty good on. I probably could have gone harder. I probably could have taken an inside line, but I was really happy with the result and I didn't feel completely blown up. Same with the bike. I think I probably could have pushed a little bit harder, but again, I didn't want to go too hard too early. And turns out I got to the run and I fell apart, even though I felt like I had left a little bit in the tank. So don't go out too hard. Don't find somebody and try to reel them in and go after them, because then you might just knock yourself out of the race. And so that leads me to saying, race your own race. Come up with a goal that's realistic from the beginning. If it's just completion, be fine with that. Train yourself, even if you're used to being, some stud athlete in whatever thing it is that you do. Realize that your first time is likely going to be just a struggle to complete, and there's no reason to tie anything to that unless, again, you're to the point where that's realistic. So race your own race. Don't let other people distract you. Don't fall into trying to chase people down, and just make sure that you're in your own zone that day and that you're going to be happy with just completing. And then the next one is, don't think that this is something that is out of your abilities. So like I mentioned before, I didn't have a robust experience load before this. I had been active, but it seemed like such a daunting task, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I realize now that I think if somebody who's relatively fit decides to do it, like with a year of training, I think it's totally doable. Or if you have longer, great. Or if you're really fit, you might even be able to do it in less. I know there's plenty of people who have done it with less training. So if it's something that's on your mind, I highly encourage pursuing it, breaking it down into different projects, if you will, kind of like I did with the running, learning how to get to a certain distance, then biking, whatever makes sense for you. Just don't write it off, because like I said, I was not a huge athlete. I was able to complete it, and I'm really proud of it. It feels like it has raised the ceiling of what I view my limitations to be physically and mentally in so many different domains. And so now, while I'm not planning to do another triathlon, moving forward, I am going to be doing a lot of mountain biking and bike packing and some races. And this spring, Sadie and I are even planning to go ride our bikes across Spain. In fact, this weekend, I'm going down to Arizona with my brother and a buddy, and we're going to do a big bike packing event. And I'm super excited about it. And I realized that the confidence that I got from doing this, whether it was the training or the event itself, I'm not sure, but the confidence now makes it to where ideas that sounded, crazy years ago now are just something that I'm like, yeah, it'll be hard, but, I got this. Like my brain can handle discomfort, and I've dealt with the suck for 13 and a half hours before, and on a bike and running and swimming. And so if I want to, I can make it happen. And so I think that's really valuable. It can help you in so many different domains, and I really encourage it. So if you want to see a spreadsheet that I use to train, or some of the gear that I use, I'll link them down below, and I might actually put this up on my blog as well if you guys want to go check that out. But please do leave comments with any questions. If somebody has more experience and they want to chime in, by all means. Overall, coming from a newbie who now holds this little trophy that's actually been in my underwear bin since the day of, because it's really not the most important thing, I highly recommend it. You won't regret it if it's on your list of things to do, even if you're like me and you only do it once and then you say, okay, that's good, I'm done. I just say go for it.